My parents co-signed my brother's $80,000 car loan without hesitation. When I asked for $2,000 to keep my lights on, Dad said, "You need to learn independence." I didn't argue. I just stopped calling. 6 months later, they needed a favor. I simply said, "I learned independence." My name's Mark, I'm 32, and I used to think the phrase "blood is thicker than water" meant something. Turns out it just means blood makes a bigger mess when it hits the floor. Metaphorically speaking, of course. I'm not a violent guy. I'm the kind of guy who apologizes to furniture when I bump into it. But what my parents did over the course of about 3 years turned me from a people-pleasing golden retriever of a son into someone who learned the most important lesson of his life. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who teach you to love yourself the least. Let me back up and give you the full picture. I grew up in Crestwood, a mid-sized suburb outside of Louisville, Kentucky, the kind of place where everybody knows your business before you do, and there's a church on every corner competing for the Sunday crowd. My parents, Jean and Loretta, had 2 boys. There was me, the oldest, and then my younger brother, Sutton. Yeah, Sutton. My mom named him after some character in a soap opera she was obsessed with when she was pregnant, and honestly, the name fit him perfectly because that kid has lived his entire life like he's starring in a drama where he's always the hero and everyone else is a supporting character. Growing up, Sutton was the golden child. And I don't mean that in the vague, "Oh, my parents liked him a little more" kind of way. I mean it in the concrete, measurable, you could chart it on a graph kind of way. When Sutton played baseball, our parents were at every single game, even the away ones 2 hours out. When I ran cross-country, my mom once asked me, "How was your little jog?" when I came home with a second-place medal at regionals. That one stuck with me. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was some angel growing up. I was a quiet kid, average grades, nothing flashy. I didn't demand attention and I didn't cause trouble. But in my family, apparently those were the wrong qualities to have. Sutton was loud, charming, and always had some new thing going on that needed funding, celebrating, or rescuing. By the time we were both out of high school, the pattern was pretty well set. Sutton got enthusiasm and a checkbook. I got a pat on the back and a "you'll figure it out." When I turned 18, I moved out. No fanfare, no tearful goodbye. I packed my stuff into the back of a beat-up Honda Civic I'd bought with money from bagging groceries, and I drove to a 1-bedroom apartment 20 minutes across town. I remember my dad standing in the driveway, arms crossed, and his parting words were, "Good. A man should stand on his own 2 feet." I was 18. Sutton was 16 at the time and had just gotten a brand new laptop because he said he needed it for school. I had been sharing the family desktop that still ran Windows XP. But sure, Dad. Independence. I busted my tail for the next decade. I'm talking grinding. I worked full-time at a warehouse while taking night classes at the community college. Took me 4 years to get a 2-year degree because I could only afford a couple classes at a time. Nobody helped me. No tuition money. No groceries dropped off. No, here's $100 to help with rent. I didn't ask for it, either, because by then I'd internalized the message. Mark handles things on his own. Meanwhile, Sutton coasted through a state university that my parents helped pay for. Not fully, but enough that he graduated with minimal debt and a business degree he never really used. After college, he bounced around, working at a car dealership for a while, then tried to start a landscaping business that lasted about 4 months before he got bored. Every time something didn't work out, Mom and Dad were there with a safety net and a pep talk. When his landscaping equipment got repossessed because he forgot to make payments, Dad bailed him out. When he broke his lease to move in with a girlfriend and got hit with early termination fees, Mom covered it. The man had a financial airbag for every crash he caused. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't jealous of the money itself. I mean, sure, it would have been nice. But what really ate at me was the principle. The message it sent. Sutton was worth investing in. Sutton was worth protecting. Mark was on his own because Mark needed to learn. Fast forward to when I was 29. I'd clawed my way into a decent job doing logistics coordination for a regional shipping company. Nothing glamorous, but honest work with benefits and a steady paycheck. I was dating a woman named Jolene, who was hands down the best thing that ever happened to me. Jolene was a dental hygienist with a laugh that could fill a room and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that kept me grounded when I started spiraling. We'd been together about a year and things were solid. Then the shipping company hit a rough patch. Contracts fell through and they did a round of layoffs. Guess who was just junior enough to be on the chopping block? That's right. One Friday afternoon, my manager called me in, apologized about 6 times, and handed me a folder with my severance information. 2 weeks' pay and a handshake. I tried not to panic. I had some savings, but not much. Rent was due, utilities were stacking up, and my car needed a repair I'd been putting off. Jolene offered to help, but she was barely keeping her own head above water with student loans. I spent 3 weeks applying to every job I could find, but the market was dry and my phone wasn't ringing. That's when things got tight enough that I swallowed my pride and did something I'd never done before. I called my dad, not to ask for a handout, not for a gift. I needed $2,000 to cover my electric bill and 1 month's rent while I got back on my feet. I told him I'd pay it back within 90 days. $2,000. That was it. The silence on the other end of that phone lasted about 5 seconds, but it felt like 5 minutes. Then my dad sighed, the way he always did when I disappointed him, which apparently was often, and said, "Mark, I love you, but you need to learn independence. If I bail you out now, you'll never learn to handle things yourself." I was 29 years old. I had been handling things myself since I was 18. But sure, Dad. Independence. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just said, okay, and hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed in my dark apartment because I'd already started rationing electricity, and I stared at the wall for a long time. Jolene found me like that when she came over after work. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down next to me and put her hand on my knee and waited. Here's the kicker. The part that turned this from just sad to absolutely infuriating. About 3 weeks before I made that phone call, my mom had posted on social media about how proud she was of Sutton for his new ride. I'd scrolled past it at first, not thinking much of it. But after my dad's little speech about independence, I went back and looked more carefully. Sutton had gotten a brand new car. And I don't mean a sensible sedan. I'm talking an $80,000 pickup truck, fully loaded, the kind of thing that looks like it was designed for someone who wants everyone at the gas station to know they have money. The thing probably got 12 miles to the gallon on a good day. And how did Sutton, who'd never held a job for longer than 18 months and whose credit score was probably held together with duct tape and prayers, manage to get approved for an $80,000 vehicle? My parents co-signed the loan, without hesitation, without a lecture about independence, without a single syllable about learning to stand on his own 2 feet. $80,000 of financial risk for Sutton's toy truck, but $2,000 to keep my lights on. That required a lesson in character. Something shifted in me that night. Something quiet and permanent. I didn't make a dramatic declaration or send an angry text. I just stopped calling. The first week of silence was easy. The second week, I caught myself reaching for my phone a couple of times out of habit, the way you scratch an itch that isn't really there anymore. By the third week, something interesting happened. Nobody noticed. My parents didn't call to check on me. No texts from my mom asking how I was doing. No just thinking about you messages. Nothing. 3 full weeks, and the only person in my family who reached out was my cousin Pepper, and that was only because she needed a recommendation for a moving company. That silence told me more than any conversation ever could. When I was the one making the effort, calling every Sunday, showing up to family barbecues, sending birthday cards, it looked like we had a relationship. The moment I stopped rowing, the boat didn't move. I'd been the engine the entire time, and nobody even noticed when the engine shut off. During this stretch, things at home got worse before they got better. My electricity did get cut off for 4 days. For days in late October, which in Kentucky means it's cold enough to be miserable, but not cold enough for anyone to think it's an emergency. Jolene basically moved me into her apartment for that stretch, even though she had a studio that was barely big enough for one person. We slept on a pull-out couch with a bar in the middle that left a bruise on my ribs, and I remember lying there in the dark thinking, my parents are sleeping in a 4-bedroom house right now, and they don't even know my power is out. And they wouldn't care if they did. That thought should have made me sad, and honestly, part of it did. But a bigger part of it made me angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of angry. The cold kind. The kind that settles into your bones and becomes fuel. I picked up gig work, delivery driving, moving furniture for people off those community boards online, even helped a guy install a fence one weekend. Jolene and I pulled what we could, and I got the power back on. It was tight, crap level tight, but we made it work. Every penny I scraped together during that stretch felt like it had weight to it. Like I was building something out of nothing, which I suppose I was. About 6 weeks into my silence, my mom finally texted. Not to ask how I was. Not to check if I was alive. She texted to tell me that Sutton's girlfriend, Tamsin, was throwing him a surprise birthday party and I needed to be there. Not we'd love it if you came. Not it would mean a lot. I needed to be there. Like it was an obligation I'd been slacking on. I stared at that text for a solid minute. Then I typed back, can't make it. Work. I wasn't working that day. I just didn't want to go watch my family fawn over Sutton while I pretended everything was fine. My mom responded with, "You always have an excuse, Mark. Your brother notices when you're not around." I almost laughed out loud at that one. Sutton noticed my absence the way you notice a missing throw pillow. Vaguely, briefly, and only because someone pointed it out. I didn't respond after that. But the exchange lit something under my mom, because 2 days later she called. I let it ring. She called again. I let it ring again. On the third call, I picked up, mostly because I was worried that if I didn't, she'd somehow escalate to showing up at my door, and I wasn't ready for that performance. Mark Anthony Calloway, why are you ignoring your mother? Full government name. That's how I knew she was gearing up for a guilt trip of epic proportions. I kept my voice flat. I'm not ignoring you, Mom. I've been busy. Busy doing what? You can't spare one afternoon for your brother's birthday? He was hurt, Mark. He asked where you were. I had work. I didn't elaborate. Didn't feel like I owed her an explanation. You know, your father and I have always tried to treat you boys equally. She actually said that, without a trace of irony. I held the phone away from my ear and looked at it like it had just insulted me, which I suppose it had, through her. But you make it hard when you pull away like this. Family is supposed to be there for each other. That was the sentence that almost broke me open. Family is supposed to be there for each other. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, where was family when my power got cut off? Where was family when I asked for $2,000 and got a lecture? Where was family when Sutton got 80 grand in co-signing, but I got a dial tone and a life lesson? But I didn't say any of that, because I knew, with absolute certainty, that it wouldn't matter. She wouldn't hear it. She'd deflect, explain, reframe, and somehow I'd end up apologizing for making her feel bad. So instead I just said, "You're right, Mom. Family should be there for each other." And I hung up. She called back twice. I didn't answer. She texted a long paragraph that started with, "I don't know what's gotten into you," and ended with, "We raised you better than this." I read it once, felt my jaw tighten, and put my phone in a drawer. Jolene was watching me from the kitchen with that look she gets when she's choosing her words carefully. She's not the type to tell you what you want to hear. She's the type to tell you what you need to hear, and then make you a grilled cheese while you process it. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I think I'm going to be." "Good answer." She slid a plate across the counter. "Grilled cheese. I told you." 2 weeks after that phone call, Thanksgiving happened. Or rather, Thanksgiving happened for the Calloway family, and I wasn't part of it. My mom sent a group text to the extended family about hosting dinner, and I was included on the thread. I didn't respond. When the day came, Jolene and I made our own little Thanksgiving at her apartment. She roasted a chicken because we couldn't afford a turkey, and we watched football and ate pie from a grocery store bakery, and it was honestly one of the best Thanksgivings I'd ever had. No walking on eggshells. No watching Sutton hold court at the head of the table while my dad looked at him like he'd invented fire. Just me and Jolene and a chicken that was slightly overcooked but made with love. My mom texted that night. "Missed you today. Your father says hi." I'm sure he didn't, but okay. I texted back a simple, "Happy Thanksgiving," and left it at that. The thing about going no contact, or low contact as it was in my case, is that it doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels lonely. It feels like you're the one being punished, even though you're the one who was wronged. There were nights I picked up my phone and almost called my dad, not because I forgave him, but because the silence was so heavy it pressed against my chest. I grew up in that house. Those people are stitched into my earliest memories. Cutting them off wasn't like removing a splinter. It was like trying to remove a rib. But every time I felt that pull, I'd remember sitting in my dark apartment, alone, while my parents slept soundly knowing their 30-year-old son might not have heat that week. And the pull would disappear, replaced by that cold, quiet fuel. Christmas came around, and I didn't go home for that either. My mom called on Christmas morning and I answered, because it was Christmas and I'm not a monster. She cried. She asked me what she'd done wrong. She said Sutton missed me. She said my dad was too proud to call, but that he was worried. I listened to all of it, and when she was done, I said, "I appreciate you calling, Mom. Merry Christmas." That was it. No fight. No accusations. No door left open for her to twist my words into something she could use against me later. I think that conversation shook her because she was quiet for a while after that. But honestly, by then I had bigger things to focus on. Because something was happening in my life that I didn't see coming, and it was about to change everything. Remember that gig work I was doing to keep the lights on? One of the jobs I picked up was helping a guy named Harlan move his late father's estate out of a storage unit. Harlan was in his 50s, built like a retired linebacker, with a white beard and the kind of handshake that made you feel like you just signed a contract. He ran a mid-sized logistics and fleet management company called Ridgeline Operations. Not huge, but solidly profitable and growing. When I showed up to help with the storage unit, I didn't know any of that. He was just a guy on a job board offering $150 for a day of heavy lifting. We spent about 8 hours together that day, moving furniture, sorting boxes, making trips to the donation center. Along the way, we got to talking. When he found out I had a logistics background and a community college degree in supply chain management, he stopped mid-sentence, put down the box he was carrying, and looked at me like I'd just told him I could speak Latin. "You're telling me you have actual logistics experience and you're hauling furniture for $150? I shrugged. Job market's been rough. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a business card, and said, "Call me Monday." I'm not kidding. Don't make me track you down. I almost didn't call. That's the thing about being kicked down for so long. When someone extends a hand, your first instinct is to wonder what the catch is. But Jolene saw that business card on my nightstand and basically threatened to call Harlan herself if I didn't do it by noon on Monday. So I called. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Harlan's office at Ridgeline Operations, signing paperwork to become their new dispatch coordinator. The pay wasn't life-changing at first, $38,000 a year plus benefits, but after months of scraping by on gig work and leftover chicken, it felt like winning the lottery. I had health insurance again. I had direct deposit. I had a desk with my name on a little metal plate, which Jolene photographed and made the wallpaper on her phone because she said she was aggressively proud of me. I threw myself into that job like it owed me money. I learned every route, every driver's name, every client's quirks. Within 3 months, Harlan moved me up to operations assistant. Within 6 months, I was basically running the day-to-day scheduling for half the fleet. Harlan wasn't the micromanaging type. He was the kind of boss who gave you rope and watched to see if you'd climb it or hang yourself with it. I climbed. During this stretch, something else happened that matters to the story. Jolene and I got engaged. Nothing fancy. I saved up for 2 months, bought a ring from a local jeweler who gave me a deal because I helped his nephew move apartments, and I proposed on a Tuesday night in her kitchen while she was making pasta. She said yes before I even finished the question. I think her exact words were, "Obviously yes, now get up before the sauce burns." That woman is my whole heart. The wedding was small. Courthouse ceremony, 12 people, a reception at a barbecue place that Jolene loved. My parents weren't invited. I thought about it. Jolene and I talked about it more than once. But ultimately, I didn't want to spend my wedding day managing their feelings or watching my dad look uncomfortable or hearing my mom make passive-aggressive comments about the venue. I wanted one day that was mine, fully mine, without the weight of their approval or disapproval hanging over it. My cousin Pepper came, though. She brought her girlfriend Della and a bottle of champagne that was way too expensive for a barbecue joint, and they both cried during the vows, which made me cry, which made Jolene laugh, which made everyone cry harder. It was perfect. Word got back to my parents through the family grapevine, because of course it did. Crestwood is the kind of place where news travels faster than sound. My mom called Pepper and apparently lost it. Sobbing, screaming, the whole 9 yards. How could he get married without telling us? How could he do this to his family? Pepper, bless her, told my mom that maybe if she'd been more interested in Mark's life before the wedding, she would have known about the wedding. My mom hung up on her after that. My dad sent me a text 2 days later. It said, "Heard you got married. Congratulations, I guess." I guess. 2 words that told me everything I needed to know about where I stood. I didn't respond. Meanwhile, at Ridgeline, things kept moving. Harlan had a vision for expanding the company into last-mile delivery for e-commerce clients, which was booming, and he needed someone to build out the new division. He asked me if I was interested. I told him I'd need a raise, a small team, and 6 months to prove the concept. He laughed, shook my hand, and said, I like a man who knows his worth. Took you long enough. That hit different. Not in a bad way. In the way that made me realize I'd spent my whole life undervaluing myself because the people who were supposed to see my worth never did. Harlan saw it in 8 hours of moving boxes. My parents couldn't see it in 30 years. I built that division from the ground up. Hired 3 drivers initially, set up contracts with local businesses transitioning to online sales, and created routing software modifications that cut delivery times by 20%. Within the first quarter, the new division was profitable. Harlan gave me a bonus and a new title, Director of Operations, Last Mile Division. I was 30 years old and running a department. Not bad for the kid who needed to learn independence. Jolene and I moved into a proper apartment. 2 bedrooms, a little balcony, a kitchen where you could open the oven without hitting the opposite wall. We adopted a dog, a scruffy mutt named Hector who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts, but had the sweetest temperament of any creature alive. Life was, for the first time in as long as I could remember, actually good. Not just surviving. Good. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about my family during this stretch. I did. Mostly late at night, when things were quiet and Hector was snoring at the foot of the bed. I'd wonder what they were up to. Whether Sutton's truck had been repossessed yet. Whether my mom had redecorated the kitchen like she'd been talking about for years. Whether my dad ever sat in his recliner and thought about the phone call where he told his struggling son to figure it out himself. But those thoughts came and went like weather. They didn't stay. I had Jolene. I had Harlan and the team at Ridgeline. I had Pepper, who checked in regularly and had become more like a sister than my actual brother ever was. I had built a life that didn't include my parents, and the strangest part was how natural it felt. Like taking off a shoe that never fit right and realizing you'd been limping for years without knowing it. By the time the next part of this story happened, I'd been essentially no contact with my parents for about 1.5 years. I'd seen them once, briefly, at a family funeral where we exchanged polite nods and nothing more. My mom looked older. My dad looked the same. Sutton wasn't there, which I heard later was because he was going through something, which in Sutton language could mean anything from a breakup to a bankruptcy to a bad haircut. I was at peace. I was settled. I was building something real. And then my phone rang, and it was a number I hadn't seen in a very long time, and everything I'd built was about to be tested in a way I never expected. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in March. I was at my desk reviewing delivery metrics when my phone buzzed with my dad's number. I hadn't seen that number pop up in over 1 year. I stared at it for 3 rings, then picked up because curiosity is a dangerous thing, and apparently I hadn't learned that lesson yet. Mark. His voice sounded different. Thinner, somehow. Like he'd been deflated slightly. It's your father. I know, Dad. Caller ID exists. There was a pause. He wasn't used to me having an edge. Old Mark wouldn't have said that. Old Mark would have said, "Hey Dad, everything okay?" and immediately started absorbing whatever was coming. But Old Mark had his power shut off while his parents co-signed a luxury truck, so Old Mark had been retired. "I'm calling because we have a situation and I could use your help." He said it stiffly, the way you'd ask a stranger for directions. Not warmth. Not "I miss you." Just utility. "What kind of situation?" He exhaled. "It's about Sutton. And the house. Turns out, and I want you to really appreciate the irony here because I certainly did, Sutton had defaulted on the truck loan. Not just missed a payment or 2. Fully defaulted. 6 months of nothing. He'd lost his latest job at an equipment rental company after getting into an argument with a customer. His girlfriend Tamsin had left him, and he'd apparently been living in the truck for a few weeks before the bank came for it. And since my parents had co-signed that loan, the bank came for them too. $80,000. My parents were now on the hook for the remaining balance of a loan they'd co-signed without hesitation for their golden child. The bank was threatening to put a lien on their house if they didn't settle up or make arrangements. My dad's retirement account had already taken a hit from some bad investments the year before, and my mom's part-time work at the church office wasn't exactly bringing in the big bucks. They were, in his words, in a tight spot. I sat back in my chair and let the silence do the talking for a minute. My dad filled it, reluctantly, with more details. Sutton had also racked up credit card debt that he'd hidden from everyone. Something in the range of $20,000. The truck wasn't the only thing he'd been irresponsible with. It was just the biggest. My parents had already drained their emergency savings, helping Sutton cover some of the credit card minimums, And now the truck loan was the anvil hanging over their heads. So what are you asking me, Dad? I wanted to hear him say it. I needed to hear him say it. Another pause. I could hear my mom in the background, whispering something I couldn't make out. Coaching him, probably. We're asking if you could help us out. Financially. Just to get through this rough patch. Your mother and I can't lose the house, Mark. I let that sit for a beat. How much? $15,000 would get us current on the loan and buy us time to work out a payment plan with the bank. $15,000. $15,000. The man who told me $2,000 would cripple my character development was now asking me for 15 grand because his favorite son had driven an $80,000 truck into a financial ditch and taken them with him. I didn't react on the phone. I told him I'd think about it and call him back. He said, "Don't take too long, Mark. The bank isn't patient." As if I didn't know what financial pressure felt like. As if I hadn't lived it while they looked the other way. That night, Jolene and I sat at the kitchen table with Hector sprawled on the floor between us, and I laid it all out. The call, the loan, the amount, the irony so thick you could spread it on toast. Jolene listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is how I knew she was taking it seriously, because that woman has opinions about everything and she is not shy about sharing them. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do. You just don't want to say it yet." She was right. She's always right about the stuff that matters. What I wanted to do was say no. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because saying yes would mean nothing had changed. It would mean I was still the one who gave and gave and gave while my parents took and took and took. Only now the amounts had more zeros on the end. But it wasn't just about me. It was about the house I grew up in. The hallway where my height was marked in pencil on the doorframe. The kitchen where my mom made cornbread every Sunday. The backyard where I learned to throw a football with my dad before Sutton came along and everything shifted. That house still meant something to me, even if the people in it had let me down. I called Pepper the next day and told her what was going on. Pepper, who had always been more plugged into the family current than I was, filled in some gaps I didn't have. Apparently, Sutton had been spiraling for months. The breakup with Tamsin wasn't just a breakup. She'd left because he'd been blowing money on online gambling and lying about it. The job loss was actually a firing for cause. And the living in the truck situation had been going on longer than my parents admitted. They'd known about his problems for a while and had been quietly hemorrhaging money trying to hold his life together without telling anyone. They didn't ask anyone else for help? I asked. Pepper laughed, but not the funny kind. Who would they ask? Everyone in the family knows Sutton's a mess. You're the only one who actually has the means to help. And honestly, I think you're the only one they think would actually do it. That hit me. They thought I'd do it. Not because they respected me or valued me, but because they'd trained me to be the one who always came through without expecting anything in return. I was the vending machine. Put in the guilt, get out the compliance. I spent the next 2 days doing something I'd never done before. I sat with the decision. I didn't rush. I didn't people please. I talked to Jolene, I talked to Pepper, and I even talked to Harlan about it. Not the money part, but the family part. Harlan, who'd lost his own father and knew what complicated family dynamics looked like, said something that stuck with me. The question isn't whether you can afford to help them. The question is whether helping them would cost you something money can't buy back. That man should write fortune cookies. Profound ones, not the weird ones that just say a smile is a curve that sets everything straight. By Friday, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to say no exactly, but I wasn't going to say yes the way they expected, either. I was going to do something I'd never done in my entire relationship with my parents. I was going to set terms. My terms. And if they didn't like it, they could call Sutton and ask him for the money. Oh wait, they couldn't, because Sutton was the reason they were in this mess in the first place. I called Jolene at lunch and told her my plan. She listened, asked 2 clarifying questions, and then said, "That's the most Mark Calloway thing I've ever heard, and I love it." I told her I loved her too, and then I sat at my desk and drafted the most important phone script I'd ever written. Not in anger, not in bitterness. Incomplete, calculated, bone-deep calm. I was going to call my dad back on Saturday morning. And for the first time in my life, the conversation was going to go exactly the way I wanted it to. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock sharp. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my phone in front of me. Jolene was on the couch pretending to read a book, but absolutely watching me over the top of it. Hector was asleep under the table, blissfully unaware that his dad was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I dialed my dad's number, and he picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. "Mark, have you thought about it?" "No, hello. No, how are you? Just the transaction." That actually made it easier. "I have, Dad. Can you put Mom on speakerphone? I want to talk to both of you." There was a brief shuffle, some murmuring, and then my mom's voice. "We're both here, honey." She hadn't called me honey in a long time. I noted it the way you'd note a used car salesman complimenting your shirt. Flattery with a purpose. "Okay, here's where I'm at." I kept my voice level. Not cold, not warm. Neutral, like a news anchor reporting on something that didn't personally affect them. "I'm going to help you. But I have conditions, and they're not negotiable." Conditions? My dad's voice had that edge. The one that said he was already offended by the idea that his son would dare have terms. "Too bad. First, I need a full accounting of what Sutton owes and what you owe because of him. Not rough estimates. Actual numbers, bank statements, loan documents. I want to see exactly what we're dealing with." My dad started to object about family privacy, but I cut him off. "Dad, you're asking me for $15,000. It became my business when you made it my business." My mom jumped in quietly. "We can get that together. Second, I'm not giving you $15,000. I'm lending it to you. Jolene's cousin is a paralegal. She's drawing up a repayment agreement, 3 years, 0 interest. You'll both sign it." My dad sounded like I'd proposed a duel. "A repayment agreement? Between family?" "Yes, between family. The same way a co-signing agreement should have been handled between family, but we'll circle back to that. Third, and this is the big one, I want a sit-down conversation. Face to face. Not about the money. About everything. About why Sutton gets $80,000 in co-signing without a blink, but $2,000 for my electricity required a character-building seminar. We are going to have that conversation, and you are going to listen. Not defend. Not explain. Listen." The silence on the other end was so long, I checked to make sure the call was still connected. Then I heard something I'd never heard before in my entire life. My dad cleared his throat, and his voice cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. "Okay, Mark." 2 words. But from Gene Calloway, a man who expressed emotion the way a cactus expressed moisture. Those 2 words were practically a symphony. "Okay," I said. "I'll come by next Sunday. We'll talk first, and if the conversation goes the way it needs to go, I'll have the money transferred by Monday." My mom jumped in. "Mark, we love you. You know we love you, right?" I paused. "I know you believe you do, Mom. I think we need to talk about what that looks like in practice." I hung up before she could respond. Not to be dramatic, although Jolene said it was extremely dramatic and she was very impressed, but because I'd said what I needed to say and anything after that would have diluted it. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house in Crestwood. Jolene offered to come, but I told her this was something I needed to do alone. She kissed me, handed me a thermos of coffee, and said, "Remember, you don't owe them your peace. You're giving them a chance. There's a difference. I told you, that woman is the whole heart." I pulled into the driveway and sat in my car for a minute, looking at the house. Same white siding, same black shutters, same basketball hoop that hadn't been used in 15 years. I walked up to the door and knocked, which felt strange because I used to just walk in. But I wasn't that person anymore. My mom opened the door looking like she'd aged 5 years and 18 months. She hugged me, and I let her. But I didn't melt into it the way I used to. My dad was in the living room, sitting forward in his recliner like he was ready to stand if needed. He looked at me and nodded. I nodded back. We sat down, and I talked for 45 minutes. I told them everything. The power getting shut off. The 4 days at Jolene's studio. The gig work, the loneliness. I told them what it felt like to see Sutton's truck on social media 3 weeks before I called asking for help. I told them about missing Christmas and Thanksgiving and getting married without them, and how every single one of those absences was a wound I gave myself because the alternative was worse. My mom cried. A lot. My dad didn't cry, but he did something I'd never seen. He put his face in his hands and kept it there for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were red and he said, "I didn't realize. I know that sounds like a cop-out, but I genuinely didn't realize how different things were for you and your brother. We thought you were fine. You always seemed fine. Because I had to be, Dad. I didn't have the option of not being fine. There was nobody to catch me if I fell." He nodded slowly. "You're right. And I'm sorry. I know that might not be enough, but I'm saying it, and I mean it. My mom reached over and grabbed my hand. We failed you, Mark. I don't know how we let it get this bad, but we did, and I'm so sorry. Here's the thing about apologies. They don't fix everything. They don't rewind time or erase the damage. But a sincere one, delivered without qualifiers or deflection, can crack open a door you thought was sealed shut. I didn't forgive them that day. Forgiveness isn't a light switch. But I told them that rebuilding would take time, effort, and not just from me. Then I brought up the money. I had the repayment agreement printed out, neat and professional, courtesy of Jolene's cousin. My dad looked at it like it was a foreign document, but he signed it. My mom signed it. I transferred the $15,000 the next morning. Now, here's the part you've been waiting for. About 2 weeks after my sit-down with my parents, Sutton called me. First time in probably 3 years. He started off breezy. Hey bro, long time no talk. Like we were old college buddies reconnecting. Then he got to the point. He'd heard I helped mom and dad out, and he was wondering if maybe I could help him too. Just a little. Maybe 10 grand to get back on his feet. I let the audacity of that request settle in my chest like a lead balloon. Then I said, as calmly and as clearly as I've ever said anything in my life, Sutton, I'm going to give you the same advice Dad gave me when I needed $2,000 to keep my lights on. You need to learn independence. The silence on his end was magnificent. He sputtered something about it being different, about how his situation was more complicated. I understand perfectly, I said. Good luck, Sutton. I mean that. And I hung up. And I won't lie, I smiled. Not a big grin, not a victory dance. Just a small, quiet smile that carried about 30 years of weight being lifted off my shoulders. That was 8 months ago. My parents have been making payments on the repayment agreement. Small amounts, but consistent, and they haven't missed one. My mom calls me every other week now, and the conversations are awkward sometimes, but they're real. My dad sent me a text on my birthday that said, "Happy birthday, son. I'm proud of you." 5 words. No, I guess. Just pride, plain and stated. Sutton is still figuring things out. Last I heard through Pepper, he's living with a buddy and working at a warehouse. Not unlike where I started, actually. Maybe he'll build something from it. Maybe he won't. That's his journey, and for the first time in my life, I genuinely don't carry the weight of his choices. As for me, Harlan promoted me again last month. Senior director. Jolene and I put a down payment on a house, a small 3-bedroom with a yard big enough for Hector to destroy and a kitchen big enough for Jolene to make her pasta without elbowing the refrigerator. We close next month, but I didn't do that. I chose differently. And the life I have now, the wife, the job, the dog, the house, the peace, none of it came from my parents. It came from me, from Jolene, from Harlan, from Pepper, from every person who saw me clearly when the people who should have seen me first were looking the other way. My dad told me to learn independence, so I did. I learned it so well that when he finally needed me, I was independent enough to set my own terms. And that might be the most expensive lesson he ever taught.